Let's participate and write our future.
The Fui Constitution. You speak, we listen.
All proud Belizean. Let's take a stand and Belizeanize our constitution.
Belizeanize it. Let the Belizeanize it. Belizeanize it.
It's time for you, me, and all our we to live the best life in our country.
It's time for you, me, and we pick me to achieve the best life in our country.
The people want a better beliefs, more trusting and loving beliefs. Freedom, Alana the free, with a system where they to we. Justice for everybody, we lose them life over tragedies. A government.
The Constitution Commission has two mandates. Do a report on the Constitution, a review of the Constitution of Belize, and submit a report on that process. In order to do that, we decided as a commission that you cannot consult people about a constitution that they don't know about. And so we thought that it is paramount that we educate the people of Belize about democratic principles and institutions, raise their awareness of what is actually in the Constitution of Belize, so that we can facilitate an informed dialogue.
Presentación un poquito para como que, ¿cómo le diría? Para tener un referente ahorita de la conversación, como les he dicho, yo estoy aquí para navegar un poquito con ustedes los derechos fundamentales que están reconocidos.
Just before this constitution was launched, there was a lot of discussion about the monarchy and whether Belize will continue to be a monarchy with the King of England as the head of state or not. And a lot of energy was around this thing, especially that the Queen had died and there seemed to be a period of transition. Lots of conversations around those. Those will be one of the questions that would come before the commission. And of course, I'm curious as to what this group of persons think about that. Having a king in a foreign country, being the head of state. These are some of the questions that we might think about in our constitutional reform. We've had lots of presentations, especially at the university, about this question, and that goes around our constitutional reform, right? So this is some of the context here. Another question is about why. Some people at the very outset were very suspicious. Why are we doing this now? Does it just come out of the blue? But actually, it seems very appropriate to look at the Constitution after some years have passed. And it seems as if around every 20 years or so, a country might look at its Constitution just as a matter of course, you know? Especially since this thing was created and written before most of us were born, right? This happened, people decided these kinds of things in the interest of the country, believing that it reflects our beliefs, but none of you are here to contribute to that process. So it's a good idea to reflect on it and see if, well, is this still the case? Do we identify with those kinds of things? Does this reflect us as a people? What kinds of things do we want to keep and enshrine and hope that we still hold on and even develop and maybe strengthen some of these things? So I will be going through some of the preamble, and I would like you to think about it in that light. Does this reflect you? Do you see yourself here? What kinds of things do we value about our identity that's reflected in this document?
That the nation of Belize shall be founded upon principles which acknowledge the supremacy of God, faith in human rights and fundamental freedoms, the position of the family in a society of free men, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's very long. How I would like to summarize that part. I would say that there are two main principles in which the Belize society is founded. So the first one is the supremacy of God, and the second one is family. So why is that? When we're talking about the supremacy of God, it is not just that we're talking about a religious God. From a philosophical perspective, what we're saying is that God is the creator. We're not giving any name to that God. This is not a Catholic God, this is not a Christian God, this is not a Muslim God. We are saying that this is the creator. Therefore, the Creator creates something. And what is that something? Of course, that's called the creation. But for our purposes, like the purposes of the law, it means a lot. Why so? That is so because, like, if we talk about the superior being or the superior God, as this, well, in generally speaking, in philosophy, we say that God is the supreme cause or the supreme being, because there are different ways to demonstrate the existence of God from a philosophical perspective. What is important of that from a legal perspective? The importance of that from a legal perspective is that we are acknowledging that we as humans do not have the power to create something better than us. So if you look at the news, you're going to see that we can assemble robots and we can develop artificial intelligence. However, scientists are not able to explain how and why this artificial intelligence is working. Therefore, what we can produce, the level of what we can produce is lower than what we are themselves. Therefore, when the first part of the preamble focuses on the supremacy of God, what we're saying is just we are incapable of producing something better than us, and we are recognizing that there is this creator that did something before we existed. And that is actually part of all philosophical and it's also part of political philosophical theories until today. So probably today, like since the second part of the 20th century, there are some debates about it. But if you look at the history of politics, if you look at the history of philosophy, what you're gonna find is exactly this. So this is this captures the tradition of what Western civilization is. That is like non-regular language. So what I would say, if we're talking about the first part of the preamble, letter A, we're saying there is this God that creates something. And that something is in a given context. Which context we're talking about? Family, as the first safety net. Nest.
These provisions that speak about the magistrates are actually very important generally for you to understand. It says that a magistrate who is a qualified attorney at law shall have security of tenure. So that's a very important term. And they're subject to the compulsory retirement age set for public officers. They may be removed for inability to perform their duties or for misbehavior. And you're going to see that as we continue, this inability to perform or misbehavior being the two ways in which judicial officers may be removed. So let me say, when I use the term judicial officers, that is a way of capturing judges and magistrates. All right, that's a way to capture all within one term. So, security of tenure. This is one of the most important principles related to judicial officers anywhere in the world, because this is one of the things that give judicial officers the protection so that they can be independent, impartial and independent in their duties, that they are not worrying about someone hovering above them or over their shoulder, looking at their decisions and deciding, oh, you're going to lose your job because of a decision that you have made that has displeased someone in authority who has the ability to take away your job from you. So ordinarily, we have what's called employment at will, so that persons who are employed in an ordinary setting can quit anytime they want and basically can be fired for any reason as long as it's not discriminatory or unlawful. So if you have an employment contract, it might be unlawful, violating the contract, to fire you in the middle of it, but that's another issue. But essentially, an employer can fire you as long as it's not for an unlawful reason. That's employment at will. But judicial officers should not be subject to that general concept. They should have security of tenure, so that, again, they are not concerned about losing their position when they are making decisions. When we make decisions, it should be without any concern for anything other than the facts and the evidence. There are often times when cases come before the judges, and even at magistrate court at times, less often though, cases come before the judges that involve politicians and that involve people who, but for security of tenure, could snatch away your job. So this is a really important concept. In sync with that, it's saying you could still be removed, but only for these two reasons: inability to perform your duties, either mentally or physically, or misbehavior. So that was Section 93, dealing with the magistrate court. But just because you don't hear judges saying anything doesn't mean that there are not concerns or dissatisfactions. Not all of that can be remedied through constitutional change, but there is a need for discussion. I think there is a need for some discussion. I mean, one of the other big things I didn't write down there is budgetary.
This PCC, we said that we would not have any elected representatives involved. So I've always hesitated to come to these events, and well, I've come to other events, but to be a part of the program. But Marie has been trying and trying and trying. So she finally convinced me, and since it's Christmas, I said, all right, Marie, I'll come up and say a few words for this. And so what I want to speak about tonight is why we are here. Why did we need a People's Constitution Commission? And I'll utilize some words that I said at the launch of the PCC on November the 14th, 2022. But before I go into that, if you allow me, Master of Ceremonies, I wanted to talk about 4 attributes that I find to be critical for a good patriot, a good Belizean. We sang the national anthem listening to the words of Mr. Price, the way he sung it as a march. We kept up with it, so that's good. And these 4 attributes that I want to talk about are: 1, you have to be a good patriot, you have to love your country. It's important that you love your country. I don't have to go into that. I am sure that everybody in this room tonight loves Belize. Number 2, you have to identify with the values that make Belize what it is. Why are you a Belizean? Why am I a Belizean? What makes you different from being a Guatemalan or a Mexican or an American or a Chilean? What are those values, those unique values, those unique principles that we hold dear? And I challenge you to think about that. I remember I asked a group of students a few months ago, what makes you different being a Belizean? And they said, because of rice and beans. It's true, we have the best rice and beans, I won't deny that. But that is part of what we are, culture. Rice and beans is part of our culture. So what are those attributes in culture that we identify it? The third attribute that makes you a good Belizean, a good patriot, is that you have to be concerned about your country. You can't just love your country. You can't just identify with what makes you a Belizean, but you have to be concerned about the direction that your country is going in. And I think that is also very important. Where will Belize be in 5 years, in 10 years, in 50 years? What will we leave behind in our country? And I think that is as critical as loving your country, being concerned about the future, about the direction in which Belize is going. And the 4th principle is that you have to be willing to work and sacrifice for your country. It's not only enough that you love Belize, that you identify with the values that make Belize what it is, that you are concerned about what the direction your country is going, but you have to do something about it. You have to become a participant in your country's democracy. It's not only about representation, meaning every 5 years you go to the polls and you elect a representative and then you see that person in 5 years. You have to participate in your democracy. You have to participate in the way your country is governed. And I think those that do, they feel satisfaction because they feel that they are part of the decision-making process.
Banjo shere alcaldes, shahunilesh, chairman, harveshes chutla chiruli elana kwang, minaw sherabi kishteli chairman, malak naklay lihun sa likon People's Constitution Commission, na naksech all sa laeshak kishe shakabang nakto okeng ut na inti okeng chi rabing kilep, chi staw aliruk ayru hak angel tio chi chal chi il balirish na il chakbab. Uchi okeng chi kuslak chi atke chi ebal chi nanebak chi ebal uslek chi chankiru truhang chiku chi khalbal omalak chi ebal hakachin hakaus sa okere chi tipankil hokaut nak nasa hosin all nak shek ulung sa katiang panakwang chi cholobang chi bayak chi kutuk chi bayak ut tohanak toh kulung kepwi chi kre sa ak jo chak barki okere ki chichal chipats ok chirabing ki putiru nakakusla chilisha na il chakrabain champutiru naktiba narah kaputiru toh mahi nak tausna aran o malah kaputiru kwang sa na il chakrak macang mahungkulah kakalaan haana an chika chalkeres silbarirish nakte chaku chik kung sudak chik sa chikli aghap.
Any change in our society has to be led by people, and it has to be sparked by meaningful public consultations and engagement with people. And I really appreciate the Commission for initiating these processes. I cannot tell you the last time I have seen so many Belizeans gather together under the aegis of any organization to talk about any law or policy in Belize, and this as so significant and important as the Belize Constitution. The issue of accountability is fundamental because we want to understand not only what is the Constitution, but what is it meant to do. Mr. Usher went through the fundamental rights in the Constitution, and the rights exist, and those rights give people in Belize a certain quality of life, a certain enjoyment. But fundamentally, the Constitution is a piece of paper. Those rights are written on paper. Those rights take action, they take color, they take energy and spirit from the people. The Constitution is the people, and the Constitution is given life by the people.
Yo makawachin kumanse poite utashak chairman akhadro tu ek ang nabala karailal dan yo chunchuko gang utang kawali ilnaks kunil na el mahan skhael min kabla tocho makchak ironi kiril ironi kere kasat khane kalebal as men kwa skabila during the home na jala bigwi na achnaka constitution na te relep chaka achinan hanak ke bil sesna ashkunil de tana chabil not alanak uyin ka okre rakhlalat chakat chi kwan ka chi achakhilat uthana jo ko chinil bal ka onak akhadro achinin kui ba join hom ile atrachus khun chankiru nak tento toruk ril bal hashmet ewana ge shish kamok bere hat katepal na khain habanan nak nakhakemet ewre mokore tere banu yeshkhumil kiroterach hana khun شكابيل كايروك ابيل سيشنا اخرينا توقوتش توروكش تشكلون كيلش تيهاب خون نقيك انا مس نمتخلو تشكتوكي كان كوان كون كوان ارتاكيل نشي اوكسش كاخلم موكو تاج ايب دچك كوتات ناچوك تشروكينه هانا تشاخيل الكون خوكاون نكي وشلك لين خون ويتاك وشلا سنت اخيرونك تنتون لا اورخ توسك اوكب انيت اوكسا سنت نكوان akshe okse gobier han ne kes okre anitesh keran ho euna to kep shunu sing chakrab hink ama chakhep tashesh keran ya us khunil ho kamana khuna an khale na rakhna gwil shkabil tentonak kebil au bil sakal sa constitution hakalok alla ohral choch shlo aleb khana chin shlo aleb amko kwan kep tash khu shakla le qajak kame bamem shunat khakama joshtihom hana kwan jebil rishe bahral choch pe ya choch kakwis a preamble na tiemare pero tentonak kebil sa constitution re utanak mukoya lenta mukoya rakhta chol tentonak chakrab na te kalehral choch hana shkabil jojom roshil tentot kisih ki hamet kwan reheb minister kwan shunila chakrab na te rela rakal sa chakrab na te malahak ayrotie minister.
La protección contra el trato inhumano y cruel. Ninguna persona será sometida a torturas, ni penas o tratos inhumanos ni degradantes. Entonces, aquí es cuando viene el tema, por ejemplo, del police brutality. Police brutality puede llegar a ser tortura, pero definitivamente es trato inhumano, ¿no? Entonces, si nosotros vemos aquí lo que nos garantiza la Constitución, sí se puede ver un poco un contraste con la realidad, ¿verdad? Pero la Constitución dice que no. En ningún momento la tortura, no importa cuál sea el fin, se va a permitir. Todo se tiene que llevar a cabo de la ley, y si uno tiene una queja contra alguien que, por ejemplo, ha cometido un delito o representa, por ejemplo, alguna amenaza al Estado, todavía la Constitución dice que no se puede torturar. Entonces garantiza eso. El otro es que no me pueden registrar arbitrariamente y no se pueden llevar mis cosas arbitrariamente. Entonces, si ustedes miran a veces, bueno, yo he visto la gente caminando y después los policías sacudiéndolos, ¿cierto? Bueno, para hacer eso, se tiene que estar haciendo de acuerdo a una ley, porque ahí viene la limitación. En principio, nadie debería de poder hacer eso, en principio. Pero después viene el interés público, y el interés público es que si alguien representa una sospecha de que ha hecho algo ilegal o va a hacer algo ilegal, le va a ir a golpear a alguien o tiene algo ilegal, la ley dice, ok, lo puedes registrar. Pero tenés que tener fundamentos razonables porque tú sospechas de esta persona. Entonces, por ejemplo, no se lo puedes decir, es que, por ejemplo, no sé, en los tambos, los hombres, en Tamblo los hombres están en Mara y siempre tienen droga, por ejemplo, ¿verdad? Tú tienes es como una generalización de los tambos. Esa generalización no se puede utilizar para simple y sencillamente venir y registrar al don aquí. No se puede, no se debe, porque tú me tienes que decir específicamente cuál es la razón que tú sospechas que esta persona aquí tiene droga. No puede ser en base de una generalización, y eso es algo que garantiza nuestra Constitución. Ahora,
since I'm about making suggestions, although I'm not being paid for these suggestions, I'm doing it for free, is that it must never be said in our country again, not after the next couple months. It must never be said that 90% of us do not know the fundamental law of the land.
A certain percentage education, a certain percentage goes to sports, 3, to improve. Because when you build this hospital, you're right about education. The nightmare is going to begin when you build a hospital, not the structure. How are we going to put in 250 people there to work permanently there?
Is the protection for arbitrary search or entry, where first I'll read this, which is the explanation of the section, what it actually means. So it says that without consent, one cannot search either their property or oneself. It's legal whenever it's connected to that is required in the interest of defense, public safety, public order, public morality, public health, town and country planning, the development and utilization of mineral sources, the development or utilization of any property for a purpose beneficial to the community. So what basically this is enticing to the law itself is that how without giving their consent, one cannot enter their property and make a search without maybe a warrant, without having a legal reason for them to search, not even in your property or like oneself to do a body search. So I found this that it was really interesting about it, which is something that needs to be more specified. For example, there have been like instances where I've heard like stories from other persons all around that not to say mention names, but like the police, like sometimes they like enter on your door like knocking and then just like without permission, and then you like many people know that like you need a paper, right? But at that time you don't have the chance to ask like, excuse me, do you have a warrant? Excuse me, like what is the reason? And they're like, oh well, sorry, but we need to search your house, and then they just come in with force. So I think that it's something that Belizeans go through every single time. There are different situations where Belizeans aren't really educated that they have the right to from arbitrary search or entry.
Your Constitution, or one of the documents, the one that Dickie Bradley wrote, the preamble actually is the flowery part of the Constitution, that part of the Constitution that has the flowery, beautiful, poetic language. It says, whereas we the people of Belize affirm that the nation of Belize shall be founded on principles that acknowledges the supremacy of God, faith in human rights, and fundamental freedoms. Back again to the presentation. Fundamental rights, your fundamental freedoms. We will get to those presently. I will not read the entire part of the part A of the preamble. And B says we respect the principles of social justice, and therefore believe that the operation of the economic system must result in material resources of the community. You heard the national prayer a few moments ago, and one part of it says and mentions social justice, the increase of industry, sobriety, and useful knowledge. The increase of industry, the preamble says, to ensure that national wealth, to ensure that we share the communal wealth of the country, that we deal with the economic parts of it, similar to what obtained in the national prayer a few moments ago. It further says that C, believe that the will of the people shall form the basis of a democratic country.
About 10 amendments. There have been 10 amendments that have been added to this Constitution over the years. And so what we have right now is the Belize Constitution as in force on May 6, 2021. So this only has 9 amendments actually. The 10th amendment was passed after. And so it's not integrated into this yet. It needs to be integrated. It hasn't as such. So that has to go through a process. But at the same time, we are going through a consultative process, right? And so we will see how the 10th amendment fits into that consultative process. And the final product that will be delivered as a report, as a proposal to government next year, as such, when the PCC finishes its consultation process as such. No? So
as most of them can't have on lady justice. She take off a brassiere and tie it on the eye. She don't want to see nobody. She's not interested in who you. He's only looking at the legal issue to see who is right and who is wrong. Anytime you see that blindfold, justice is blind because they're not interested in who confronted him. Mr. Ashcroft, they do a project the wrong way in violation of the law. You and your millions back up and move out. The law is no respecter of persons. In our country, nobody can say, boy, the man pay up the judge, that's why the judge did that. We don't reach that yet. And we don't want to reach that. Yeah? So you remember that you are entitled to rights. Nobody, they give it to you. When you put on the Coast Guard uniform, it's a different ball game. You agree to restrain some of your rights. You can't do like me, I could talk anything. You can't talk anything. Yeah, you can't call in for the morning show and say, late last night while we were patrol, we came across some white snapper in the vicinity of Boca del Rio. And the amount that they took to the base is not the same amount that was found. So people restrict their rights because they decide to do that. Yeah? You have to have freedom of movement. Anybody could jump in any boat, any bus, and go anywhere they want in this country. Nobody can stop and say, but you're from Corozal, where did you do? No. We are free to move anywhere we want to go. We are free to exercise our conscience. You know how much people I meet that don't have no conscience? I think they're not sure that there's a word like conscience. You have a conscience, don't get confused. You have a God and you have a conscience. No can't see your mind. You can maybe see the brain, but you can't see your mind. But don't you have a mind? Isn't it always thinking about these fabulous girls or diva-looking bodies and so? And of course, ladies, you think about a lot of these gentlemen who exercise regularly and drink nutritious matter. Manna Yard and Monster. The important thing about Chapter 2 of our Constitution is that when you actually see the book itself, it says protection of your right to life, protection of your liberty. Every one of your rights, the Constitution uses the word protection. You know, I'm going to say this, it's simple and you all know, but I still need to say that. The Constitution, I believe, is not giving you none of these 19 rights, you know. The Constitution, I believe, can't give you that. You have that, you born with that. Human beings are not mango tree, you have rights because you are human beings. And these are nothing new. These concepts and ideas have been around for, I think, before Moses was put in the river to float across to get on different destiny. The right that human beings, that's what he was fighting for. He saw his people as slaves in Egypt. And he thought like...
They say a lot of movies that states where when the police arrest you, the police say, you're under arrest, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say will be used against you. You have the right to an attorney to one phone call. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will provide it to you by the state. Do you understand this right? They watch that on the Miranda right. They watch that on TV. Yes, you have a similar right in Belize. You have a right to an attorney, but you are paid for her. You hear what the American one say? If you cannot afford an attorney, what will happen? One will be provided to you by the state. That Belize, listen to what we section say, shall be permitted to defend himself before the court in person or at his own expense by a legal practitioner of his choice. Yeah, you could pick your lawyer. If you want Mr. Denison when you go into private practice and have $1,000 an hour, you could get her. You don't have to pay the $1,000 an hour or any part thereof. So you have one right. So somebody really never happy with this, the Corozal. And the person say, Mr. Osha, no, I want to make a proposition. No, even though we know they make no propositions then. How they make a proposition? We need to be provided an attorney free of cost for criminal offense. It will be costly, but people, that is one of the proposition. People say, so if you can't afford an attorney, you are at a disadvantage, because all the prosecutors at the high court level, they are trained lawyers.
So there are these different elements in the Constitution, people. The Constitution is not going to solve all our problems, but the Constitution could really be a blueprint to helping us to create what is called enabling of an environment. But that means we have to make that Constitution really provide that enabling environment. Right? And so, there's all of these areas. The executive, the legislative, the fundamental, you know there's not a fundamental right to health care? You know that? We don't have a fundamental right to get basic health care. People, a fundamental right, don't we all have a fundamental right to a home? Shouldn't we? Or a fundamental right to work? Right? To earn a decent living?
The legislature, as the word says, that the Constitution set up, their job is to legislate, pass laws. In fact, the Constitution says good laws. Just for passing a law because you want to get political money or they're not going to want to embarrass anybody, so let me not go there. The legislature also have two other important functions which is important for you to understand. One is only there to pass the budget. The budget, I believe, is way over $1 billion a year. That's the budget, you know, that is what we spend on fireman, on policeman, on BDF, Coast Guard, fix the street, put in light, run road, street, bridge. A massive amount of way over $1 billion is the annual budget of this little tiny paradise.
We have seen several cases where persons sue the state, whether through the Commissioner of Police in the Brighton Card and Greg Nunes case, or where Schulte sued the government of Belize and the Attorney General. So even the state is subject to the rule of law. Nobody is above the law. Now we want to look at part one. Part one is very short. Part one of the Constitution has only 2 sections, 1 and 2. That's it. That part one right there. So that one easy for the exam when they come at the end of the presentation. Section 1 defines Belize. Very important. If we don't have Belize, throw away the Constitution. We don't need to go any further. But Section 1 defines what Belize is. And it says that Belize shall be a sovereign democratic state in Central America in the Caribbean region. But the word that we want to look at there, which is very important, I just told you a few minutes ago to remember it, a sovereign democratic state. Not a theocratic state, not a kleptocratic state, a democratic state. Democracy, power of the people, by the people, for the people. And even though it is not stated the majority, it is implied. Obviously the majority of the people will lead to this democracy that we have in this beautiful 8,867 square miles.
I have brought 2 books with me. One, I take it out of my vehicle because I'm always getting caught up in what is inside of that book. And it is my favorite book of all times. Sinner that I am, I read it a lot. But of late, I'm not sure if it is because of the beautiful language. Because actually, this is the blueprint that Hollywood used to make millions of dollars. Adventure, war, intrigue. There's even a movie on the end of the world called The Book of Revelations. There is a superhero in here. Not because he walked on water. He told people who had been dead for days to come out of the grave. But he brought a message. Well, I'm not the preacher here this morning, but he brought one powerful piece of message that if we love one another the way God loved we, and treat one another the way we want one another treat we. And if you don't believe that he walk on water, or you actually take purified water and turn it into wine, it don't really matter. It's the message in this book. And I say that because lots of people, sinners included, they know what is inside this book. And the other book I brought, which is the Bible for the lawyers and judges, I just heard shocking news, and I hope I never hear it again. Can we change that statistic to around 90% of the people do not know what is in the Constitution of the country? And that have nothing to do with UNO. Yeah? That's just a shame on the Ministry of Education from the time we got independence till presently. This book is boring. But I want to start where the book starts. And in the Constitution of Belize, both the actual Constitution and the book that prints the words, there is a thing called preamble. Because I don't teach you nothing about our Constitution, there is a need for us, and especially your Commission Chairman Chanona, to understand this most important portion of the Constitution. It only says preamble, but that is because it's liars that charge a lot of money and put those words. The preamble in the Constitution of Belize is a statement of the principles, the beliefs, the moral and the spiritual values of those persons who were around in 1981, stating what kind of constitution they want the new nation of Belize to be governed by. A very, very important part of the Constitution, because as the Constitution says in the very first section, Belize is a sovereign democratic country. And what is more democratic than the people of the country saying what type of constitution they want their nation to be governed by?
The first time that I read the preamble, I looked at it and I thought, wow, this is one of the most impressive pieces of statecraft I have ever seen. It was fashioned for you by visionaries whose mission was to create and sustain an independent nation. In a moment, I'm going to walk through some of the steps in that vision. But first, I want to speak frankly to you as teachers, principals, pastors, union representatives, students, journalists, human rights advocates, and public servants. The very fact that you're here today in an environment dedicated to education means that you understand, each of you, that you have the mission, you understand the mission that your founding generation set out for you. So each of you has two things to do. One is to learn as much as you can about the amazing legacy that your founding generation left you in that Constitution.
I'll be taught in every school to every student in the country, so that we can banish ignorance in regards to the most important law. How you could go to school and not know nothing about the Constitution? How you could graduate from college and not know nothing about your Constitution? You don't know your basic right. You don't know that the police can put up a thing mark checkpoint and stop you and want to look behind the loose and look behind. They don't have no right to do that. You can only be stopped if there is probable cause, reasonable cause to suspect that you maybe have some illegal stuff in there, or you yourself just commit a robbery and you're trying to escape. We are not pat liquor, you know, we are not stray dog. You can just stop where anytime you want, come out of the vehicle, put up your hand, show me your license. Where you're going, where you come from. That is illegal. It is a violation of your constitutional right. They do it every night because the people don't know. You know, I can't use certain words here, but ignorance is a, you know. All right, the very first section of our Constitution says, Belize shall be a sovereign democratic nation. So nobody can try to play, you know, give them a bit of power, go to their head. Belize is a sovereign democratic nation. That is your highest law saying that. And then it defines what is this area that we call Belize. All the coordinates, all the keys, everything that makes up the land and sea that belong to we. Now, if the international code says that Guatemala should remain, forgive my personal opinion, I say if they should remain in the Saskatoon because they took it about 7 years ago, you know that we have to ask permission to go into the Saskatoon River, our own river. We want to build a forward base. We went to the Saskatoon Island. The island is in the half of Belize portion of the river. But the Guatemalans in 2015 say, move yourself. Don't come back here. And after that, we follow it and tell we move ourselves and we're not going back. We were there with our Coast Guard looking for the best spot on this swampy mangrove island, and now we are building our farthest southern military base on the mainland of Belize because we can't go to our own island.
And thirdly, the Constitution creates all of the offices of state. So the Constitution says there shall be a Prime Minister, there shall be a Governor General, there shall be a Leader of the Opposition, there shall be a Chief Justice, there shall be a Public Services Commission, there shall be a Director of Public Prosecutions, there's a Consolidated Fund. So how the governmental structure is set up and operated, the fundamental laws are in the Constitution. And so the Constitution, by those reasons, is the law of Belize. It is the supreme law that really establishes what our country is about, the type of society we want, the type of governmental structure we want, and the type of engagement we want between the people and their state and the government. It is important also for us to appreciate what came before the Constitution. So before the Constitution, you had a very centralized governmental operations where the government was very powerful and the large majority of people relatively had little economic or political power. And what the Constitution does fundamentally is it is meant to give power to the people, and it is meant to break up the centralized state apparatus, so that one of the fundamental principles of the Constitution is this notion of separation of powers. You may have heard of that, but that is surprisingly nowhere mentioned in the Constitution, but it has been interpreted that the Constitution creates three separate and equal branches of government, each of which act as a check and balance on the other, so that you have the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch. And before, all of these were one, but with the Constitution, all of these branches of government are separate. equal and each of them act as a check and balance on the other. One of the ways that people can understand the Constitution then is a system of checks and balances. The Constitution, for it to work, has to operate in a rich context of creating limited government. That's the purpose and policy behind any constitution. It is a document that puts restraints on the state and on the government, and it exemplifies individual liberties and individual rights. We have a rich constitution. It's a very strong document, but it needs to be analyzed, assessed, critiqued, and strengthened so that our political system can be exemplified and individual rights can be focused on more deeply and intently. And
because when we talk about good governance, right? When we talk about transparency, when we talk about responsiveness to the people, we have to look at the sections of this Constitution that deal with accountability. And there are several areas that have been worked to make the Constitution and the government a little more accountable, like the creation of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. All money that government gets has to go to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. And that Consolidated Revenue Fund is governed by certain important principles, including the Belize Finance and Audit Reform Act that says government has to account for all the money it spends. It has to make a report. And anything it spends above a certain amount, it has to get permission from the House of Representatives. It has to take it to the House.
The Commission must submit a report to the Prime Minister, the Commission's finding. And then, I'm quoting from the document sent to Prime Minister has 60 days to send the report to the National Assembly. Now, this is fascinating, because Barbados has no similar commitment. We have no commitment to what is going to happen when I hand in my report. I know they have to do something about it, because really, since there became a republic almost by fiat, they now have to do the backfill and get it through. And I know it has to happen for 2027. Know why? Election day. That has to happen. But this one has something significant in it. 60 days afterwards. So it may well be that your report, you may need an extension of time. We have got to get one just recently. We were given 15 months, and it wasn't possible. But they promised me 18 months. And then between promise and the day I was sworn in, I found it was cut from 18 to 15. And now, when I had to tell them, look, I'm running out of time, so then went back and sent it by another 7 months. So I have to hand in my report by 19th of April, which I think we will meet. Your 18 months runs out in May next year sometime. But the reality is, you know what? If you can't get it done by then, ask for the extension. Do it right. Don't rush. Don't rush it to meet the timeline if you want to get it right. But in trying to get it right, do the due diligence. Ask the hard questions that need to be asked. Are you being given the resources to do the things that you want to do, to do the studies you want?
Of the Director of Public Prosecutions. It says plainly in subsection 1, there shall be a Director of Public Prosecutions whose office shall be a public office. So what does the DPP do? The functions of the DPP are also set out in the Constitution. Section 50, subsection 2 says that the DPP shall have power with good and sufficient reason to institute and undertake criminal proceedings, to take over and continue criminal proceedings that have already been instituted or undertaken by another authority, and to discontinue criminal proceedings. So the DPP can begin criminal proceedings, she can discontinue criminal proceedings, and she can take over criminal proceedings. Because there are other institutions that are given power to investigate, to lay charges, and to commence prosecutions, such as immigration, customs, fisheries. So if they are prosecuting a case, the DPP is empowered to take over that case and continue or discontinue the prosecution. But the most important part of Section 50 of the Constitution in relation to the DPP is subsection 6, which says that, subject to the powers of the Attorney General, in the exercise of the powers vested in him by subsection 2, the DPP shall not be subject to the direction or control of any other person or authority. Now, when the Constitution refers to the powers of the AG is given by Section 42(2) of the Constitution responsibility for the administration of legal affairs in Belize. So administratively, the Attorney General is ultimately responsible for the office of the DPP. So if I want to have additional prosecutors, for instance, at the office, it is the Attorney General who is ultimately responsible for moving those kinds of matters forward. But when it comes to making decisions in relation to prosecutions, Section 50, subsection 6 says, no one can direct or control the DPP.
Section 20, and Mr. Bradley quotes from the Constitution, if any person alleges that any of the provisions of Section 3 to 19, which give you your rights, these are your rights, your freedom of conscience, your freedom of movement, your liberties, your freedom of association, they're all listed between Section 3 and 19, but Section 20 says, any of your rights in this Constitution listed, inclusive of 3 and 19, has been, you see it in bold, has been, is being, or is likely to be contravened in relation to him, or in a case where the person is detained, or any other person alleges that such a contravention in relation is to a detained person, then without prejudice or any action with respect to the same manner which is lawfully available, that person may apply, it's not the Supreme Court anymore, it's the High Court, for redress. Section 20, young man, empowers you that if you think somebody is has taken away your rights, there is no statute limitation of going back to say, I cannot redress it, is taking away your rights, current, or if you consider that it is likely to be taken away, you can go to the High Court for redress. The court protects your rights. The question is, can you afford to go to the court? And so this is why we're saying in this constitutional review, how do we give you more power to your rights? The Constitution does not give you your rights, it protects it. So we have an opportunity to look at the way you obtain your rights.
You have made a very valuable contribution that village councils need to be protected and empowered by the Constitution. The Prime Minister and his cabinet are, courts are, your representatives are, even the Attorney General's office, Solicitor General, those offices have constitutional protection, even an ombudsman, but the village council is not in the Constitution. And so I believe, yes, we will put forward that it should be. And it's not just an issue of autonomy. It's also an issue of the kind of finances that are needed for a village council, because I think most village councils depend on like liquor licensing is one of the money that come in, and I think that's about it. Not true. Like you have to do fundraising and all of that. So one of the ways for a village council to be independent, because even the water board is separate, so there is constitutional work that needs to be done to create a proper system, because you can't have autonomy without finances. It is necessary. So thank you very much for your contribution.
Fundamental rights and freedoms are. So it reads, whereas every person in Belize is entitled to the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual, that is to say, the right, whatever his race, place of origin, political opinions, color, creed, or sex, but subject to respect for the rights and freedoms of others and for the public interest, to each and all of the following, namely life, liberty, security of the person and the protection of the law, freedom of conscience, of expression and of assembly and association, protection for his family life, his personal privacy, the privacy of his home, and other property, and recognition of his human dignity. And lastly, it says protection from arbitrary deprivation of property. These are all the rights that we are guaranteed as individual citizens.
Boy, there's no confusion about sexes, huh? All these things that are placed there in the conscience of our minds today are not living out what is said in the Constitution. There are no confusions there in the Constitution. It clearly lays out social justice, the principle of subsidiarity. These are very important concepts that we need to understand. Taking care of the least, the more vulnerable in our population. The right to work.
So it matters what's in that document. How many of you agree it matters what's in that document? Because one day somebody can come and say, hey, we won't take anybody to university anymore. We're just going to take you to high school. Would that be good or bad? Be bad. So that document is extremely important. That document, because that document, when the new workers come, the new workers, when they become employees of Pathlight, they get that document. And then they get to read that document and they begin to set things in place according to that document. How many of you agree that that document is extremely important? Put up your hand. Because that determines the future for Armenia and for the whole country. That's a constitution. That's a constitution. Now, if Pathlight has a constitution, what about your country? Your country has a constitution. Your country has a document, a paper that dictates who we are. Who we are. Where are we going in the world? Who are we in the world? Who are we as individuals? What is it that we want for our future? How do we want to be treated? How do we want others to be treated?
Distribution of resources, for example, respect for the principles of social justice. So it is important to highlight for the Commission where this is not happening. And I wanted to say one thing about the comments too. Just because the individual issues, very specific local issues, might not rise to the level of constitutional amendment, it was recommended to the Commission that we still include these types of comments in the report that the Commission does provide, because this forms some crucial context to the changes or reforms or things that you have to consider in the Constitution. So those comments don't just get, thought about and then we put a report that doesn't include them. The recommendation is that these kinds of, the voices of the people be included there kind of directly there. And it helps us to think about other things that might empower our communities, things like participatory budgeting. I can imagine the kinds of participation that would occur at the village level if people had an actual direct say in where the money would go. So all that to say thank you. Please keep in touch and let's keep this education process going.
It's time for you, me, and all our way to live the best life in our country. It's time for you, me, and we pick me to achieve the best life in our country. Oh yeah, hay que mejorar la vida de todos los beliceños. It's time for you, me, and all our way to live the best life in our country.